This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, doctoral students, and everyone in between, culture workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Corey D.B. Walker, who is Dean of the School of Divinity at Wake Forest University, where he is also inaugural director of the program in African American Studies. His work is ambitious, with a focus on key figures in the African American intellectual tradition, political and cultural moments of liberation struggle, and the meaning of religious traditions in Black American history. Along with numerous scholarly articles and edited volumes, he is the author of A Noble Fight, African American Freemasonry and the Struggle for Democracy in America from 2008, and is completing a book-length manuscript entitled Disciple of Nonviolence, Wyatt T. Walker and the Struggle for the Soul of Democracy. In this conversation, we discuss the complex political and cultural origins of the field of Black studies, the place of religious study in the field, and how future work in Black studies might address existential questions of environmental degradation, racism, and the future of the planet. Good afternoon, Corey. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Not too bad, difficult times, but trying to take moments of pleasure. It's beautiful, this crystal clear blue sky, cold, crisp day today. So trying to take in the fact that we always live under the sky. Just having one of those moments.
That's right. That's right. That's a good way of looking at things right now.
Yeah. But, as is true with so many of these podcast episodes, really my day is better because we have a chance to talk today. I've been really looking forward to this. I was really happy that when you said yes, that you made some time. I know you're busy, got a lot of things going on. But I think your perspective is really important to have on the podcast for a number of reasons. I think, and I've said this with other people working in the field, I think that religious studies is really underrepresented in Black studies in terms of imagining the field. And I think that's something that I'm happy to sort of not correct, but to rebalance a little bit. And so having your perspective in that regard, I think is really important, as well as the fact that you've done not only program building, but also administrative work. I think these perspectives are super important to understand how Black studies sensibilities and orientations inform all of those things. So that's just a long way of saying, it's just generally, it's always good to have the podcast up and moving, but that I'm especially looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for the time.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to our time together and talking about these important topics. And I agree with you on both of them, especially in moments like this.
Well, let me start with, we'll have a chance to talk about Black studies, your research projects, how they all sort of connect. But I wanted to start with sort of more personal question and just ask you, what drew you to the study of Black life? What drew you to Black studies? And for me, always a companion question with that, which is, what sustained you in relation to this kind of work?
Well, I have a circuitous route to Black studies. I mean, as you stated, I come to Black studies through religion. As a matter of fact, I come to religion through finance. So if you look at my background, I did my undergraduate.
That's a twist I did not see coming. Okay, I saw that you had done a finance degree, but I did not. That's great.
Yeah, I started off in finance, and really it was there at Norfolk State University where everything really crystallized. Though I was a finance major and Beta Gamma Sigma in the Business Honor Society, I had a wonderful group of professors who really wanted me to be well-rounded, and so we would take history seriously. Take Black history seriously. And of course, I was part of a student movements up around Greek Fest in 1989. And we organized against what happened there in Virginia Beach. Some of it made iconic by Public Enemy's Brothers Gonna Work It Out video. But most importantly, that formation reminded me that my studies in finance were not disconnected from the realities of everyday life that engage most people in the world. And when we critically think through the Black world, I can remember us photocopying photocopying Black Marxism because one of our professors in finance told us to read it. And so I have a early Z edition, the original edition of Black Marxism, photocopied page by page. And we read that in our reading groups. And then we also had a wonderful store on West 35th Street in Norfolk. We had the Islamic Trading Post, and we had the Self-Improvement Center. These are spots of intellectual formation in the community. So our dear brother George Welsh, who ran the Self-Improvement Center, would run reading groups, and then we'd run reading groups. And we're doing this all alongside our organizing work as well as our finance work. And so I saw a continuum. So when I went into finance right after graduation, it was not in isolation. I was in Charlottesville working at State Farm Insurance, but more importantly, I was engaged in the community of Charlottesville. We put on summits for the Black community. We pulled Black professors from UVA who participated in that. And what each of them reminded me of was about the life of the mind. And it was my real mentor throughout my life, Carthene Rolanda Bazemore Walker, who showed me the real thrust and crux of intellectual life and of vocation. And it was my friend Larry Rowley and I. Larry came to UVA and we went to undergrad together, two different universities, same school. And, of course, we were comrades for a long time. And then we came across Vincent Harding's essay, The Vocation of the Black Scholar and the Struggles of the Black Community, from that iconic 1974 Institute of the Black World issue of Harvard Educational Review. And it was literally Harding's essay that we used as sort of a Bible. Larry photocopied them. And at that time, you go to Kinko's to get it bound. We had it bound. That was our intellectual guide for our life in the university. To this day, I still have that copy of Vincent Harding's essay. You can readily get it as a PDF, but I have it right on the desk that's right behind me right now. The cover is yellowed, but Harding's words are still prescient, and that has followed me throughout my career at UVA, at Brown, at Winston-Salem State, Virginia Union, Richmond, and now here at Wake Forest. Vincent Harding has provided a light, a beacon for us to follow intellectually, and the ways in which we engage the academy in and through Black studies. And we see Black studies as this capacious disciplinary formation that stands at the very heart of the university. It's not a department. Our goal isn't to be a departmentalized. I mean, we are departments, but that's just the local arrangements of the university. Really, it is a way of life. It is a way of seeing the world, and it is a way of living into a new form of humanity that will then become planetary for all of us to really and truly thrive and to live more righteous futures.
So I first of all, I just have to say, hearing 1989 and Kinko's, and now I know we're part of the same generation. I like that, I mentioned 1989 in the classroom, and they look at me like I rose up from the grave. But more substantially, first of all, that was just amazingly told. Thank you. And there's something so important about those community places, right? The bookstore, right? The Islamic Trading Post. These places that anchor Black study and in anchoring Black study sort of off the campus, adjacent, or the expansion of the campus. I think it's kind of interesting to think about how we would give geographical terms to that. Mm-hmm. I love it when those come up in these stories that begin our podcasts. I just think it's so important. And I just will say also, one of my collaborators, Bree Gorell, is going to start doing some podcasted conversations with Black-owned bookstores. And I just think like that way of thinking about Black studies in that expansive sense is not only important in terms of the Black studies imagination, but because it keeps coming up in so many of these narratives, as you just had.
You can't you can't imagine Black studies outside of these spaces of formation. I mean, if you're up at Howard, you're looking, if you're thinking with Black studies at Howard and you're looking at the Black University movement, they're not only a movement on campus, but they're also a movement in community. You can't think of the Black University movement in the 60s without thinking Negro Digest that then moves into Black World. You look at the people who contributed to that discourse. It is absolutely amazing. To this day, I was up in D.C. a month ago doing some work and meeting some folks there, and we had a program at Wake Washington. And once we finished the program, the first place I went to was Holly Garima's Sankofa. Sankofa is a shop, is a space right now. You go there, you have a nice little cafe. Holly does screenings there, and of course, you have an amazing bookstore. And this was a Friday afternoon. And it was a Friday afternoon around 4 o'clock, and the place was packed. I mean, folks were reading. You know, I was able to pick up Gerald Horn's latest, and able to connect with the folks in the community. I mean, those spaces there. I think of spaces in the Haiti community near North Carolina Central, so formative for the students in SOBU, Student Organization for Black Unity, that then becomes the Youth Organization for Black Unity. You look at places in and around the barbershops in and around A&T, you could not have the February 1st movement outside of those spaces. Winston-Salem State, there was a wonderful bookstore right near Winston-Salem State. These spaces, you know, most of them have dried up, particularly around the Black colleges.
Hmm.
There has to be another story about these institutional spaces at Black colleges that were central and formative to the Black studies imagination. It's not something new. They're just not Black-owned bookstores. They are really spaces of formation that serve multiple missions, and some of them you can't find anymore. They lie. They rest in the imagination, but they are adjacent to these two historically Black colleges. I mean, I can't think of, you know, when you think of the Atlanta student movement in the AUC, there are multiple spaces in and around Atlanta. Same as with Raleigh-Durham, same as Greensboro, same as Richmond, Virginia, same as Washington, D.C., Norfolk State, Petersburg. I mean, they provide the critical geography of Black studies. And sometimes our institutional location and institutional identity overrides the intellectual mission of what Black studies was about. And then we then backfill it in with really these modalities of thinking that are real, you know, alien to Black studies, like theory versus praxis, or being an activist intellectual. If I'm an intellectual, I'm in service to the Black community. That activist doesn't qualify the intellectual. I mean, I think of, you know, when we were working with our colleagues at the University of the West Indies, and you're talking about Liberty Hall, that our dear colleague Rupert Lewis developed out of his work with the Garvey movement, but is really out of the ways in which you think of Walter Rodney grounding. So here's another space. It really is an alternative narrative and an alternative genealogy of what Black studies is, that then will open up some new ways of thinking about the intellectual work that we must do in our contemporary moment.
I mean, in some ways, you may have answered this question, but maybe I'll ask it to sort of gather back so many of the things you were saying there, which is just to get a sense of your portrait of Black studies, how you imagine the field, because, you know, as you've already discussed, you know, and alluded to, you know, it has its origins in this interesting tension between, you know, the demands students and maybe some faculty, but really students had for campuses to provide a space for the study of Black life. And Black studies was going to be that, because disciplines as they weren't going to cover that kind of those kinds of questions. But also late 1960s, early 1970s is this moment of the radicalization of Black liberation struggle that really collapsed so many of those boundaries between community and campus, between study and prescriptive action. But I think that sort of the political prescriptive dimension of Black studies and the pursuit and development of an intellectual tradition. There's a tension there, right? There's some kind of relation, however we describe it, that's at the origins of the field, and I think still lives with us today. And so I want to ask you sort of how you imagine the field of Black studies, which, you've already spoken quite substantially about, in the context of this kind of tension.
I think the way I narrate it, particularly in my intro course, is I narrate it as a vision that's caught between two movements: the Black university and Black studies. Black studies becomes the default position. The Black university is what we're trying to build. That's the original aim. I mean, this is what Sylvia Winters would say, riffing off of J.Z. Smith. Map is not territory, right? We think it's Black studies. No, this was really about a new form of university life that came into emergence with historically Black colleges that then were struggling with these curricular programs and curricular outlooks that did not fit the material and epistemic realities of Black life and of Black thought. And it was not just within the U.S., it was also global. I mean, the idea of just thinking within the geopolitical confines of the U.S. was a limiting condition. So in many ways, the Black university debate that erupts on the campus of Howard University is the debate that we should be very conversant with. And we look at the interlocutors were college presidents. One who contributed to that discourse was none other than Samuel DeWitt Proctor, a black man of the Black church tradition. And this is the other thing that we talked about earlier. Black religion becomes underrepresented. I would say that the reason that happens is because we took a Black studies modality into departmentalization and taken to the idea of a European episteme that then says we are secular and not sacred, and we've only read religion as this sacred secular dichotomy. So we can't read religion, not even when it's there at its inception. So if we take that Black university, Black studies debate, this is even replicated in the 1969 Yale University Black Studies Conference with Armstead Robinson. And you remember, it's the Yale University provost who places the question on the agenda. Ronald Judy rewrites that question and disforming the canon in a very critical way. But we're going to get back to Judy. But what Yale University provost says, what does it mean for a university to bring the study of Black life and Black thought at the center of the university curriculum? This wasn't about a department. This was really about how do you redefine the university? How do we redefine the production and reproduction of knowledge? And then how do we redefine the ways in which we've organized knowledge in the university and the ways in which the university functions? This is about the mission, vision, and value of the university, something that we're now in the midst of really trying to refine what we're trying to do in this moment, in this age of Trump. But this was the agenda. This was the critical question. This is why you can have a Vincent Harding and a CLR James and a Sylvia Winters and a Walter Rodney at the Institute of the Black World. This is what you have when folks are interrogating what sort of institution do we need to have in order to develop new ways of thinking for a new world, new way of living for a new world. You look at the ways in which Malcolm X Liberation University is developed. You look at the Black independent school movement. These are all institutional phases of the elaboration of that original issue of, is it the Black university or are we just doing Black studies? We, in many ways, the default position won. And so now the default has won. Now it operationalizes a hegemony over our intellectual discourses, so that the first thing we want departments, we want chairs, we want tenure. And then, of course, we want PhD programs that follow the way of traditional PhD programs, right? We're getting PhDs to then staff the university in its current guise, in its current configuration. But we've lost the original thrust of what the movement was and what the movement is and what it can be in this moment. I look at the way in which we there's a pivotal moment that we also can track in this conversation, and that pivotal moment is 1993. In 1993, we had two books that were published. One was Ronald Judy's "Disforming the Canon," the African Arabic slave narrative, and the other was Paul Gilroy's "The Black Atlantic." One gave us a multilingual planetary discourse with new ways of thinking about knowledge, the organization of knowledge, and the institutional forms, and then how would they marry with the very material realities of New World African peoples. That's Ronald Judy's text. The other gives us a way in which Black life always has to live in the shadow of Europe, live in relation to Europe, speaks in one language only, English, and is always trying to write back to the metropole such that there is no centering of Black life and Black thought. There's always a centering of Europe, and the response must then come from the Black to then try to occupy the center that Europe occupies in, and that is Paul Gilroy. We took the Gilroy route. There is another way.
So, first of all, this podcast is totally worth it just for that answer alone, and it raises a ton of issues to talk about. So everybody's who listens to this will have a lot to think about and talk about, because I mean, there are many things about what you were saying, but one thing that stuck out for me when you're talking about this sort of transforming the university rather than simply creating a department. I mean, one of the long-term consequences of it, in addition to the one you just talked about with the sort of Judy Gilroy contrast, is I think a lot about my own, now 20-something years in Black studies, how much we play defense. I think that's really just been like our default mode, because you say, we want positions, we want chairs, we want tenure. I mean, there's a kind of defense of like, don't take our positions, right? Can we please grow a little bit? But one of the things that does is any kind of offense we end up playing is simply to build our own department rather than, as you say, this really aggressive vision, which is, no, the offense is of the very idea of education. I love that. As if this podcast gets ears on it in this field, I think that is a moral question for us. Like, it's not just a strategic question, it is a moral question about like, what are we really trying to do here, and is it good?
You're exactly right. I mean, I think of that wonderful essay by Tony Cade Bambara in The Black Woman and Anthology on the issue of roles. In that essay, that culminating last two paragraphs, she's talking about what does it mean to be a revolutionary in this moment. And all of a sudden, revolutionaries want to be instantly made. She said, instant coffee is the hallmark of current rhetoric. If we think of, instant coffee, then that's 1970. Yeah. We're talking about folks who just want presto changeo, okay. And this is a reason why we then we delimit the terrain to the department, to faculty lines, to the existing regime of the organization and reproduction of knowledge within the existing academy. When we begin to, the hegemony of being inside the U.S. now mirrors the intellectual hegemony reigning over the field. When we have our geopolitical confines are not planetary, they are within the nation state. This is all part and parcel of how we're thinking about instant coffee, or being instant coffee, and having that metaphor operationalize itself over the discipline for half a century. When we think of that, then of course we're going to look at we're going to look at the most efficacious way in which we can achieve what, quote unquote, what it means to be a success. And of course, what that means is to be a success within the current configurations of capital in our contemporary moment. What Black studies reminds us of in this Black university phase. I mean, this is really, I mean, I can't but help go back to that founding speech by Lerone Bennett at the first Black Studies directors meeting at the Institute of the Black World, the challenge of Blackness. He sets out an intellectual agenda that we have yet to begin to undertake in a critical and systematic manner. this is not to say we haven't had scholarship that has been tremendous in advancing the boundaries of human knowledge, understanding, and human understanding of existence. No, there is a critical agenda whereby the department is but a phase of the evolution. Faculty are but the phase of what we're trying to do. It's not to say that it's a department or nothing. It's not an either or. Amy Césaire got us out of that with discourse on colonialism. We don't live either or lives, nor should we have either or thinking. But what Lerone Bennett set out was a question, the open question of Blackness, to which we need to continue to respond, not race studies. Remember, Black studies is not race studies.
Mm-hmm.
Had my dear sister, and a wonderful colleague, Atia Hussein, who just wrote a book, No God But Man, who reminded, I said that to her, and she wrote that as a thank you. We don't do race studies. And so when we begin to center on race studies as Black studies, we have truly taken ourselves off of an intellectual trajectory of what Black studies is in terms of reimagining intellectual life, reimagining the ways in which we organize the world, and reimagining the ways in which we understand and organize humanity. This is why I find it very curious that there's so many folks who think through the human as this proper construct and not as an intellectual project. It just doesn't erupt on the agenda in the 21st century. This is at core a question that is at the core of all of Black thought and Black existence from the beginning. And I say that literally, from the beginning, how we imagine our human lives and human existence from the beginning of humans. And we can find it crystallized. And for me, as a Christian thinker, and as well as a religious thinker, you could find that in the North African church. Of course, the great scholars of North African antiquity, Augustine, Tertullian, Origen, you'll find wrestling with that. You'll find it throughout those West African Islamic cultures and learning centers. You'd find it throughout the New World as New World Africans begin to continue that struggle. And then, of course, you'll find it in its exemplary articulation within those individuals we see as central to Black studies. One exemplary instance of this is Du Bois's opening paragraph of The Souls of Black Folk. Du Bois opens with, this curious seeing and eyeing of me, but he raises that question. To the question, what does it mean to be a problem, or how does it feel to be a problem? Mm-hmm. Du Bois responds, I seldom answer a word. He refuses the very discursive grounds of defining Black life, existence, and thought as a problem. And then he begins to elaborate and other sensibility throughout the rest of the essays, using the most modern of form, the form of the essay. Mm. That is instructive for how Black studies continues its project. I'm not trying to prove Black humanity. I'm not here to validate that Black life has worth, value, and dignity. That's inherent. Walter Rodney in African History in the Service of Black Liberation says that right at the beginning. Humanity is not something you defend. Humanity is a given. So that's just the ground. And if we begin with that understanding, maybe these big questions can be rephrased. We can begin to develop new ways of thinking about a project, and it becomes capacious. So it is inclusive of what we may think of, or those categories of the religious, those ideas of the religious that continue to percolate in all of our ways of thinking, so that we don't have this awful dichotomy of secular and sacred that's then mapped on to Blackness. So then we miss the ways in which spirituality, notions of the cosmos, notions of things that are ultimate, are always already at work in the epistemic frames that inform our orientations.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I mean, there's so I have to teach after this. I'm really bad. I mean, this has me, I mean, and I also love next time I might assign this podcast next time I teach Souls of Black Folk, because my students really, I think they kind of roll their eyes how much I emphasize his refusal to answer that question. So I'm like, well, this person also says that. So,
We're
but
thinking alike. Yep. Yep.
but no, that was just wonderfully put, and I mean, you've already articulated this really, I mean, expansive is of course the word, vision of Black studies, but as much as anything, also this interesting like double movement of insurgency, right? Of remaking the university, but also refusal of, oh, we're not answering those questions on those terms. So I love this. You've shifted so many paradigms about how to even talk about Black studies with real clarity. I thank you so much for that. And so I'll make a sort of abrupt shift to really asking you then about your research and orientation. Your writing is mixes historical studies, religious studies, culture and politics, and there's so much insight that you're able to get out of that sort of collage of approaches and multiple layered framings. And so I'm interested in reflecting on your own work in relation to Black studies, how you think your work and your way of doing Black studies work fits in the history of the field and the tradition, but also what boundaries do you think it pushes? What innovations, what sort of walls is it pressing against?
Well, I really hope and aspire to be a true intellectual, meaning someone who's curious about the questions that are being raised. And here I'll go to Gadamer's Truth and Method. Gadamer reminds us that when questions are raised, the answers aren't settled. So that means there are possibilities that are open. And it's really a way when you think of someone like a Vincent Harding, who's a trained historian, but Vincent Harding writes in a way that is extremely beautiful and elegant and moving and powerful and convicting. I mean, Vincent would have you doing any number of things. It is really being in conversation with the artists and writers in Black studies. I mean, I think of the time I had at Brown was just a unique moment in my career where we had a constellation of writers in and around Churchill House who were world historical figures. Ama Ata Edu, George Lamming, John Edgar Wideman. Then we could have Askia Touré who would come through. We had Chinua Achebe, Gabriel Okara, Brenda Marie Osby. These scholars who were scholars of Black studies. I mean, the first scholars of Black studies are those at San Francisco State. They're scholars of the humanities. They are those scholars who begin to provide us with a language for this world, a way of thinking about the world, and a way of inhabiting intellectual life that enables the fullness of our humanity to come through in the search and quest for language, in the search and quest for new concepts, in the quest and search for new forms. I see my formation within that. I mean, I'm a polyglot, as we talked. I started off in finance. I went to School of Theology at Virginia Union. I was a prison chaplain. I went to Harvard Divinity to try to figure out, what does all this mean? I have a PhD in American Studies. I taught in Germany. The only thing that's been constant in my career has been movement and change. And that movement and change has been constant, but it's always been the questions that have searching and that have preoccupied me. In A Noble Fight, it was a question around how do African Americans rationalize American democracy? How do they do it discursively and materially? And my first project around Black intellectuals in Europe, I'm on the track of Georgiana Rose Simpson, first African American woman to receive a PhD, and I'm glad everyone corrected that. She received it a few days before in 1921, but she wrote her dissertation on Herder's conception of Das Volk, and what she also did was then she honored her one of her mentors and friends, Fraulein Agnes Bouchard of Rostock, Germany. What did it mean for an African American woman to travel to the northern parts of Germany in the late 19th, early 20th century, and then finish her PhD at the University of Chicago? This is when a lot of folks are finishing at the same time. It means that they're raising new questions.
Mm.
As I move to new institutions, those questions take on planetary dimensions. At Brown, we had a global humanities project where we were connecting with folks at the University of West Indies and University of Cape Town and the University of the Western Cape. Dear colleagues, Keisha Khan Perry, who's now at University of Pennsylvania, and Tony Bogues, who's still at Brown, connecting with our colleagues across these spaces, are thinking through knowledge production and reproduction. We're convening meetings of folks thinking through, what does it mean? How do you produce knowledge? This pulls up on the work that we were doing at UVA with the University of Venda. This pulls up on the work that we're doing with Lewis Gordon and with Walter Mignolo when we're collaborating around these global networks in Buenos Aires and in Paris, France. I mean, those conversations shaped me, and they shaped me in fundamental ways. And it reminded me that the questions I'm asking and the ways in which I'm trying to respond to those questions can't just manifest themselves in as Lewis would say, a disciplinarily decadent way, as if the disciplines will answer the questions. I'm in the process of having to forge the form as well as begin to forge a response to those questions. I look at the work, I had a chance to work early in my career with Kevin Everson, a master filmmaker at the University of Virginia. And he and dear colleague Claudrina Harrell have just blown up the ways in which we think about Black experimental film and the ways in which we look at questions of form in filmmaking and trying to tell just the history of Black students at UVA. Their Black firework is just absolutely amazing. And it provides us with those glimpses of the ways in which Black studies strains against form and then opens up new intellectual possibilities. When I think of the writing, one time we had a conversation with John Edgar Wideman on his book Fanon, and Wideman, that book has no punctuation, and so we had all these great theories, and Wideman said it's aesthetically uninteresting to him, and it was like, wow. I mean, and then so now you're relooking at the page and beginning to think through, what do those pages mean? So those questions have propelled my my intellectual work and the ways in which I think about my intellectual work, and it has propelled the ways in which I move through the academy intentionally and in an attempt to build that which we hope will be able to host a Black studies imagination, and then train the next generation of dreamers, theorists, and and those who, with an expansive imagination, can imagine a new world and a new human.
I love that. And just sort of a random association, you mentioned George Lamming, and previously mentioned Kinko's, which I connected to. I met George Lamming at a Kinko's in Providence one time, and there was something amazing about him making photocopies at Kinko's. I was there with my little baby, who's now a junior in college, but funny, a collection of names and places.
That Providence was their Providence was a very special place, and it was really a special moment that you could run into a Lamming. I mean, George was there. I mean, we were able to bring in Charlie Cobb and Snick Legacy. I mean, we had an event. Derek White and I talked about this when we first met in person. It was at a Institute of the Black World conference, a closed conference, and we could still remember talking with late Vincent Harding about the IBW and its international linkages. I mean, the one thing about Providence as well was the connections, the rich, deep connections to the Caribbean, to the University of the West Indies. We're thinking, through the University of the West Indies, Mona. I mean, I ran a research center my first part of my career. It was University of the West Indies. It was Tony Bogues. It was Paget Henry. It was Brian Lewis at the University at the Center for Caribbean Thought that we were first connecting to. Then, of course, we connected with Walter. I mean, that's the geography. That's the intellectual landscape we're operating on. It is really, that's for me, that's the essence of Black studies. It's nothing less than the world itself.
I love that. Yeah, the people at Brown in that particular phase. I mean, it still has wonderful faculty, but it's really, really stunning. Actually, it seems like a fiction piece, but it was actual humans walking around a hallway. That's unbelievable. Yeah. Let me pick up on that last comment you made, and this connects to so many of your previous comments. Sort of what is, as a field, call it a field instead of a discipline because it's a very different thing. In this vision of a sort of transformation of the university, transformation of the idea of intellectual life, of thought, of community, what do you think is the sort of index of the success of Black studies in the future? Is it that Black studies as we now know it, as a department, as a place that's located in, here, Taliaferro Hall, in a hall at different universities, is a sort of future in the index of a success in the future of Black studies to really not be a Black studies department, really to not be a defined field? Or is there something unique about this thing that we're calling Black studies that actually is like a discipline that we can imagine it just having a future where it can't be absorbed into this wider vision, into this wider transformation, and that really is its own thing?
I think of in response to that's a critical question and a profound question. I think of Greg Carr's wonderful article, "What Black Studies Is and What Black Studies Isn't," and it can find its institutional home departmentally, but its intellectual mission and agenda always already exceeds the department and the university in its current configuration. That doesn't mean it doesn't work through those modalities. It does, and it has. And universities will never be the same. That's a reality. Black studies in the university and the way it is in the university and the scholarship that has been produced by scholars in Black studies, the university will never be the same. There will never be a pre-1960s university moment absent Black studies in the university. That's not going to happen. The question that we're preoccupied with is, what is the future of Black studies? Meaning, its institutional expression cannot remain solely within a disciplinary departmental modality. It must now begin to think, where are we moving as a planetary people and as a planet and as a culture and planetary existence? We know right now that the future we face planetarily with global climate change reminds us that human existence will not be the same in 50 years as it is today. That's just the reality. The ways in which we inhabit the world, the ways in which we consume, the ways in which we extract, the ways in which we exploit are not sustainable. Intellectual life in the way in which we know it right now is not sustainable. You look at the price of tuition. I mean, what's happening really is that you see an atrophying of the imagination as capital becomes cognitive capital and begins to colonize the imagination, such that, as Gustavo Gutierrez reminds us, the poor have a right to think, but it is only the rich who can think. Meaning the conditions of possibility in which thinking and intellectual life exist. So we know historically Black studies and the university transform. The question now is, where does that transformation lead us in a moment of planetary transformation and of planetary crisis of human life and all life? This is where now a return to those formations of Black studies may offer us critical resources to begin to chart an other future, not only for Black studies, but also for the planet itself. That to me is the only agenda we have. There is nothing else.
Yeah.
This is not the Tina of Thatcher. There is no planet B, regardless of what Elon Musk wants us to think about. We have now a planetary mission, and being in the heart of the empire, we have a lot of work to do.
I love that. I love that. I mean, it's extremely troubling, but I really also, I like this sort of going back to Black studies to think about not only this broader planetary question, but also going back to the origins of Black studies to think about the future of Black studies, right? We may have the critique in our own roots, which is a really, I like that sort of doubling of time. I think and it's just the way that roots foundations often say much more than we allow them to say. And throughout this conversation, you've really evoked, I think, the way that the origins of Black studies, intellectual origins of Black studies, and activists and politics around all of that says so much more than we've really allowed it to say in here. So I take that to be one of the issues to walk away from this with. So I appreciate that a lot.
It's really part of my intellectual formation. And some may see the trace of the theological on that.
Yes. I mean, anytime Gustavo Gutierrez gets mentioned, I love that. His work and Aristide's Parish of the Poor were really transformative to me in college. He was my graduation speaker.
All
Gutierrez, actually. It was very different than the sort of drunken Irish Catholic school celebration I think a lot of parents were expecting. Rightly so. Well, let me ask us, as in some ways you've spoken also to this question, but I'll ask it, one of the last two questions I have for you. Thinking about the field of Black studies, what do you think it has done well as a field, and what do you think it has not done particularly well?
As a field, Black studies has created opportunities for students to really find and understand their mission and vision of themselves and the life of the mind in the university, and not have to contort themselves to the ways in which disciplines attempt to form and shape folks in sort of a cookie cutter approach. It has really enabled students to begin to explore new boundaries, opportunities, and ways of thinking, and to collapse fields in ways that are quite unique and quite prescient. I've always had students who were both in STEM and in the humanities, so that's normal. It was blessing having that at Virginia, at Brown. Definitely, we had students who would do Africana and then go on to medical school. I have a student here, Zen Amos, who molecular biology and biochemistry, African American studies double major. We just worked on a project proposal for him to go to Paris and spend the summer in Paris looking at the radical Black Atlantic tradition. And said, for a student to be able to do that, that's Black studies. And that's being able to raise those questions that don't find themselves neatly housed within one one disciplinary formation and container. That's what we've done well. The one thing we have not done well is develop a mode of intellectual solidarity that moves us not only within the field. When we think of the ways in which we're still struggling around questions of gender, sexuality, and identity, both nation state and globally, we still have much work to do. When we think of the tremendous work of African American women scholars, I've been formed by them. My advisor at At Harvard was Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham. My doctoral advisor was Kimberly Phillips. My mentor of over 30 years, Carthene Rolanda Bazemore Walker. When I think of the ways in which I've been shaped as an academic leader, I think of the late Marie McDemin, of course, Ruth Simmons at Brown, and Brenda Allen at Lincoln. We have to recognize that the questions that we're asking, were really raised. I mean, the critical nature of that question is raised by Anna Julia Cooper in A Voice from the South in 1886. She asked, is this the region where thought has taken us? And she's asking us about this critique of the ways in which modes of thinking are freezing us in a mode of deep pessimism, or be it, a real hard place, nihilism. And she's like, no, I refuse that. We have to refuse that, because when you look at the ways in which people are continuing to make meaning, the ways in which that tradition of scholarship of Black women, Black LGBTQ, of Black folks across the diaspora and Black folks on the continent, the ways in which they continue to make meaning, we gotta realize that no, we're not in a moment of deep pessimism or deep nihilism. We're always in a moment of possibility, as long as they're human life. And of course, when we then want to collapse all meaning to just our existence vis-a-vis a hegemonic Europe at a particular moment, that's when we've actually given up on the very idea that we're human, and our projects are part of elaborating new modalities of humanity. That's the work that we have to do better. And that's a real growing edge of the work that we have to do. But the work that we're doing with students, they're pointing and charting the way. They may not go and get MAs and PhDs in Africana studies, but the work that they're doing as undergraduates, the work some of our innovative graduate students are doing, they're pointing a way for new ways of thinking about the world and human existence in a deeply complicated moment.
Yes, that's fantastic. I mean, just the expansiveness of expansive possibilities, and that's supposed to be the pleasure of
Yes.
an academic's life, which is reading, listening, and looking.
Yeah.
And being called back to that, as I think as you articulated it, this deep moral and political responsibility, but it's also such immense pleasure. What does it mean to listen in this different way, to this different way of making meaning, of making life, of making worlds? And so,
and that's our calling. I mean, that's why we're here. Every culture has those individuals whose role it is to be the transmitters of that culture to new generations, to train those generations to begin to listen to, Samuel DeWitt Proctor has this book, Certain Sound of the Trumpet, right? He's writing about homiletics or preaching, but it is that for us as intellectuals, we're not there to just merely repeat what's going on in dominant society. We're there to provide a critical lens for us to go on as a people, as a world, as a planet.
That may be already an answer to this last question that I have for you, which is, what do you think, in a sort of Black Studies context, what do you think is a question we should all be asking? What do you think is the thing we should all be thinking about?
The planet. I say that with no. Here at Wake, we've launched a Mellon-funded initiative. It's in year 2, Environmental and Epistemic Justice Initiative. That initiative really is grounded in Black studies, but then looks at how do we understand the role of our existence and our planetary modalities of existence in this moment of global climate change and in some ways collapse. If we don't address the climate, and if that's not the top issue on our agenda, none of what we do is sustainable. And so for me, that is the question for us. And it has really animated a series of different projects for us across different formations. We work with young journalists, young to mid-career journalists, so that they can become environmental justice journalists with my dear colleague, Melba Newsom. We work with community organizers and community activists and public officials who are working on environmental justice issues to make them fellows and then to co-create courses with us here. And we're trying to figure out, ways in which it can develop into a curricular model, not just for, let's say, a science and technology studies curriculum or even an environmental justice studies curriculum. But our goal, and I've said this publicly, I said it when we first got the grant, how can we make Wake Forest an environmental justice university?
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. I mean, I firmly think that and this is just not, it's not Corey, this is not profound. If we don't address the conditions of our existence, we will no longer exist. And I can't face my daughters with that. I mean, I have to do everything I can so that they may live their lives and the futures of Yikwayama, the beautiful ones who are not yet here. The beautiful ones are yet to come. We have to work for that. So the biggest question for us, Black Studies, university, society, planet, is the climate, and we have to do everything to respond to that.
Thank you for that. That's so. I mean, you could not get a more profound place to end, but also it's a profound place to end. But it is also really intimate and has that intimate challenge of both our lives. You mentioned your children, and think about my own and other people's, and those who who still wait to to come to the world. And sort of thinking about, what does Black Studies have to contribute to this? I really am look forward to what you all do at Wake Forest with this initiative. This sounds incredibly important. So I'm really glad that you mentioned to it. And I'll put a link to any web presence it has in the little bio that comes along with this, because I would love people to get eyes on that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
I was really looking forward to this conversation. This has just been so much more than I was really hoping for or expecting. So I thank you for that. I thank you for your time, of course, but the thoughtfulness and seriousness of this conversation is going to really be something for everybody who listens. And this is just a wonderful contribution to the series. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for just creating a space for us to engage in conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Enjoy.
All right. Take care.